fun. Hello everyone, I hope I find you well. My name is Will. This is my channel MB Reads if you are new here. And today I'm going to talk about all the books that I read in January. These are the books I will be talking about, and all the timestamps are left down below if you want to skip to something. I'm now realizing half of these books are upside down. Yeah, all the information is down below, and I will be talking about them in chronological order. So let's start with Shit Cassandra Saw by Gwen E. Kirby. This is a short story collection, kind of historical, kind of magical realism. They are very feminist. All the stories have some sort of feminist commentary in them. They follow like perspectives from a historical figure, kind of reimagine their thought process. Historical like women, maybe someone who's like been forgotten. Some of them have some like, yeah, quirky magical realism. I found this to kind of try to be more unique than it actually was. I felt that some of the quirky, I hate the word quirky, but quirky like magical stuff or like sci-fi stuff felt a little bit forced. I feel like when it comes naturally to an author, it just works so beautifully and I love reading it and it just feels like refreshing and new. But then when it feels forced, it's almost cringe a little bit, and that's kind of the vibe I got from this. And I felt that it focused very much on like white feminist type of rhetoric rather than like digging deeper or like bringing something new to the conversation. That being said, whether it's due to me or the book, I felt like they got better while I was reading it. So maybe that is because I get used to like the writing and the story structure, but I did feel like they got better. My favorite story in this by far that I like absolutely loved was Marcy Breaks Up with Herself. I felt like the progression of that story, the way it was based on like main character being influenced by a reality show. I loved that. I'm starting to realize that's something I really like in books. And then how she just kind of like slowly spirals. Loved it. I thought it was excellent. A few of them are written in second person, and when it was used, I didn't feel it was all that effective. And the ones that I felt were fine, good, and like decent and were okay were Inishmore, Midwestern Girls is Tired of Appearing in Your Short Stories, Seen in a Public Park at Dawn 1982, and How to Retile Your Bathroom in 6 Easy Steps. They all worked for me, but nothing like groundbreaking. Yeah, I gave it 3 stars. It was fine. The next book I picked up was Beholder by Ryan LaSala. So I've heard about Honeys by this author and I haven't read it, but then I saw this was like a new release from this author, so I thought maybe I'd pick up their newest stuff and that it would be better. This follows Ethan, who is at this party where he doesn't really belong and he just goes to the bathroom to like regroup with his mind. And then he hears this like things happening outside and he tries to open the door, but this like other boy pushes him inside and tells him like, do not open this door, stay here and you'll be safe. And he like starts to spiral. He's within this bathroom for hours wondering what the fuck is going on. Things start happening, and then eventually he opens the door. It's light outside, it's morning now, and everyone who's at the party is now dead and their corpses are like rearranged in like this whole like a big pile, and the wallpaper is like peeled off. And he's like, what the fuck? I gotta go. The police gets there and he's just like, I just gotta disappear because I'm the only survivor, so they're gonna blame me for the whole fucking thing. And he just has no clue what's happened. So that like synopsis like really intrigued me and really made me want to pick up the book because it seemed really fun and grotesque in a way. And another thing about Ethan is that he has this power, magical power that's kind of like inherited to him from his grandmother, who he lives with. And it's that when he looks at himself in a mirror, the mirror starts like rewinding everything that the mirror has seen backwards in time, which is kind of like the magical elements of this book. And so he's forced to work with this boy that he finds that pushed him into the bathroom because he knows something. And so it's like part mystery, part action, part magical realism where there's something weird going on with his bodies, right? So I think off the bat is very like intriguing, but there, even though it was like starting with an action scene, I felt that it was like quite info dumpy and we got like a lot of information. But it has like high stakes. I was invested in like the characters. I felt like emotionally invested in the story, and like the story is very unique, and the premise and the magic and all that is very interesting. I loved the part about the wallpaper. I thought it was super creative, super fun. I felt like it was a little bit obvious that this boy had information that our main character like didn't know. And I did also feel like that the romance aspect of it, because it is a gay story, um, it felt a little bit like unnaturally developed at times, but ultimately I liked it. I felt like the story ended a little bit like too quickly at the end because there was like a lot of stuff happening and I did have to like suspend my disbelief like just a tiny bit. And like when we got the resolution of like how all of the things were connected, I felt like certain parts that were explored were like obvious, and then the parts that you didn't quite understand with how it was all connected was just kind of briefly mentioned. So I think like the time and energy like certain information was given wasn't like proportionate to what they would need, sort of. But I found it really fun. I flew through this. I thought it was really engaging, and I don't read a lot of YA, so to find like a young adult that is one pretty gruesome, which was really fun, and I was just like, I thought the characters were just very well developed, and I loved the uniqueness of the story. I gave it 4 stars, so this was fun. And then I picked up Dallergut Dream Department Store. The Dream You Ordered is sold out. Korean #1 bestseller by Mai Lee, translated by Sunday Jusin Lee. So I bought this basically because of the cover. I think this illustration is gorgeous, and I would link like the person who did this illustration because I found their art account like fascinating and really cool. And also I got this recommendation from a post by Queer Book Takes, I think their Instagram is called, because I just love the cover and I was like, what is this about? And then the synopsis is basically just, okay, I'll tell you what it is. In a mysterious town that lies hidden in our collective subconscious, there's a quaint little store where all kinds of dreams are sold. So essentially every single night, people all around the world visit this dream department store where they like can pre-order dreams or like buy a dream and then they dream that dream, but like when they wake up, they never remember this department store or where dreams come from or anything like that. And we follow like our main character who works at this department store, or in the beginning she tries to get a job there, she gets the job, and the book doesn't really have like one single narrative. Like you are following our main character Penny throughout the entire book, but essentially it's like short stories about the things that happen and experienced at this department store with the dreams. So I think the premise is super, super cool, and I was super excited for this, and I just think that this book could have been like amazing. Unfortunately, I felt like it was quite boring, and it feels very everyday for a concept that is like so unique, which I just don't understand how they could make like a premise like this kind of boring. It was very wholesome, and I do feel like literally anyone could read this. Like you could read this for like your 3-year-old, you could read this for like an old person, or you can like anyone can read this. And I don't think I've ever read a book that just appeals to so many groups of people. I think that's like really cool about this book. Yeah, it was quite slow and mundane for a book that is this silly, and I think if it weren't for the magical element, like I wouldn't have liked this pretty much. And it's just like my personal taste. I feel like the book could have been like more ambiguous and like gone further with like the magical elements and like not made everything so like life lessony. Like it's kind of with all these stories that Penny experiences. There's actually a few perspectives also from people who are like in our world, who like reasons why they kind of order certain dreams or how dreams like help you process things that happen in your life, which I did find interesting, but all the life lessons are kind of just like on the page and very out there and simple, which is just not my personal taste. Also, like all the characters in this are super flat. Like there's literally one character who her whole personality is the fact that she likes fruits, and that like that's her one personality trait. There's also a story in this that follows kind of like the idea of Santa Claus being a person that makes dreams, and I didn't enjoy that at all. I don't like reading about Christmas. I also think it would be very odd for a place that we all universally go to have like a person like Santa Claus that only like exists in like certain cultures. And then like out of all the things that we could believe in, like why pick Santa Claus? Like I didn't like that part at all. And I also think it's very weird for something like dreams, which is so just in our heads and such a concept and with something we don't like fully understand, to be explored through this channel of like, let's make it capitalism by making dreams into a store that we sell and earn money. Well, it's not money the way it works in this book, but it's just kind of weird to have an idea about that, and I don't know how I feel about that. I ended up giving it 3 stars. It was very like run of the mill. Yeah. Then I picked up Jo Nesbø's book, The Night House. So I read this in English, even though I do speak Norwegian, and I was considering reading this in Norwegian, but I just kind of didn't feel like taking the time that it would take me to read this book in Norwegian. So I ended up picking it up in English, and it's my first Jo Nesbø, and I buddy read it with my dad, which was kind of fun. We buddy read like probably once a year, so I enjoyed the process of buddy reading it with him, but this was taken from a recommendation by Books and Bow, which has now changed her name, actually, I believe. And I think it was in her best translated fiction of the year. So I had high hopes for this because our tastes align like quite well. I didn't like this. I gave it 2 stars. It is... It's divided into 3 different parts, and I can't talk about it properly. It starts off being about this boy who is a bully. He's a bad person, but he's still just a kid. He's bullying this one kid, and he dares the kid to, like, dial this random number. The kid gets, like, eaten by the phone. Like, he gets sucked into it, like, into the phone, disappears, and everyone thinks that he's just, like, killed this boy. And then another thing happens where he's, like, bullying this other kid. A kid turns into a fly. And yeah, he's still guilty of it. They send him to this asylum. It's just like, well, not asylum, but like, anyways, yeah. So that's kind of what the book is about. But then the second part, like, changes the story completely, like the narrative of the story. And the third part changes it again. So it kind of goes through like this 3 different parts of what is the story actually about? What is the premise of the story? What is real and what is not, kind of. I didn't enjoy it. One, because the clues that we were given as to like what was happening and whatever, I can't really talk about it without like spoiling it too much, which is unfortunate, but I'm gonna give like a tiny spoiler, and it is that I was telling my partner had this about this book and kind of like the obvious clues that we were given that like I didn't see, but my dad saw them, and had this like, by the way, this is a kind of a spoiler. I'm just giving you, I'll put spoiler here and when it's gone, there's no more spoilers. Had this said, that's funny, like those clues kind of make it sound like it's gonna be a Shutter Island type of book. And that's essentially what it was. The plot twist was just all of this was happening in his head. He's schizophrenic. None of it was real, kind of. And he's just like traumatized, and he made up these stories and he thought that was real. And it's just like, I do not like mental illness being used as a plot twist in this way, because it essentially made the whole book just completely pointless. Like there's no point to the book if it was just that. There was no life lesson. It was just like, trauma can ruin your life, which is like doy. We know that. And I feel similarly about like a diagnosis like schizophrenia being used for a plot twist, the same way I feel about like transness or queerness being used as a plot twist. I find it very uninteresting and mildly problematic. And I also have a friend who, like a close friend who has schizophrenia, and I just don't think it's great. What else did I have some notes here? That's why I'm looking. It's a thriller. It's a horror. What I will say though, that is very easy to read. It was quite like a page turner, but because of the nature of the 3 different parts, I would have liked each part to have like a completely different writing style. I feel like that could have really upped the quality of this book. And I think when you get so invested in a book, like I think there's no doubt that Jo Nesbø is like a great writer. and he's good at making people turn one page after another. And I think when you get really invested in a book and you find out the plot twist is something that just like, it literally made my heart drop. And I just felt like so underwhelmed by everything I read up until then because of the plot twist. It just like ruined the book for me. And on top of the fact, I felt like I had nothing to say. It was just kind of like, yeah, no one needs to read this book, and I don't understand what people see in it. Next up, I picked up a comic. This is Side Effects by Ted Anderson and Tara O'Connor. I haven't heard about this previously, but I just saw it in my local comic book store and decided to pick it up. It is a young adult queer mental health story. You follow our main character, Hannah, who starts college, I believe, and she's dealing with a lot of anxiety. And she goes to the college therapist, I believe, who prescribes her different types of medication, but each medication she tries, there is a side effect that is kind of like a superhero element. So she like turns invisible, or she like creates static or electricity and stuff like that with each medication side effect that are different. So it kind of explores her relationship to her mental illness, what is her, what is the medication, and what is the anxiety, and kind of navigating her way through this new information that she's gotten about herself. And along that, she starts dating this other girl and learns a little bit more about mental illness and being there for people. It's very sweet, it's very simple, it's also kind of fun, and I enjoyed it. I gave it 3.5 stars. I thought it was just fine. There is a book that is quite similar to this in some ways, and it's called Eat and Love Yourself, which has this like exploration of mental illness through like this one tiny magical element. And for me, that book just worked a lot better, which is why I found this one a little bit underwhelming. And then after reading the author's note, I had like a higher appreciation for what this book was trying to do, but I don't want the author note to impact the book. I want the book to speak for itself, kind of, and I didn't feel like all those messages that the author was like trying to put into it got through in the book. There's also actually trigger warning for essay in this. It could have gone deeper, the themes and the story, even for a young adult, I think. Oh my god, I have to talk about this book now. The Bone Clocks by David Mitchell. So, I've had this on my TBR for a long time. I got it from like a book exchange, which was cool. I haven't read anything by David Mitchell before, but I know he's written Cloud Atlas. I picked up this book because it was kind of my read it or unhaul it time for this book. And it got picked through my like TBR prompt cards, which was really fun. And I actually finished it. It's like 600 pages. But my initial intrigue about this book is the fact that it starts in like the 1980s, I believe. Yeah, and it ends in the 2040s, and it jumps through like different points in time. 6 different sections following 6 different people. That's actually not true. The first section and the last section follow the same person, Holly. And I just thought it'd be really interesting to read a book that like spans such a large period of time. And because this was written in 2014, I believe, even the part that starts in 2025, which is next year, is kind of like sci-fi when this was written, which I thought would be really fun. It is magical realism, kind of in the vein of Haruki Murakami, but less ambiguous and more straightforward, as well as much more British. So you follow 6 different characters, but our main character is kind of Holly. And Holly, she starts off the book running away from home. And I don't know. I don't know how to talk about this book. Should I talk about the magical elements? Should I talk about the characters? I think maybe I'm just going to talk about my thoughts and a little bit about the magic. So the magic in this book works in the way that there are these people who don't die, in the way that their soul gets reincarnated into new bodies. And then there's people who don't die in the way that they use dark magic to elongate their own lifespan on the cost of young people's lives. And Holly starts off being kind of psychic. She has these like abilities. She gets drawn into all this like drama of these two groups of people. And it's been going on for like centuries and centuries since the dawn of time, basically. And the six different perspectives we are following are all kind of like people who get involved with this unknowable war to the public, and their involvement in it and their reflections on it. And except the first part and the last part that are both narrated by Holly, all the other four parts are all by these like despicable men. Okay, maybe not the last despicable man. It's not really despicable, but they're just like so misogynistic and horrible to read from, and did not enjoy reading those sections whatsoever. But I think the language is just like, it's a really well written book, and I understand why this is a big author, but it was just not fun to read. And Holly is such a kick-ass woman, and I loved following her perspective. I found it fascinating, and I did also like getting like these small tidbits of information about what is this magic and how does it work. But it's kind of like I know Cloud Atlas is like magnum opus, but it's written kind of like a magnum opus type of book. I hope I'm expressing this like well. I had some things to say about it. It reminds me just a tiny bit of Sense 8 in a way, and I can't really pinpoint why. It's a lot of content in here, a lot of stuff and thoughts about things that don't relate to the story, and it could have been cut down a lot. And I also don't know what's like the author's point of view and what's the character's point of view. And I don't like that because a lot of the characters have like quite problematic thoughts. So that part kind of made me a little bit uncomfortable. The author also uses ableist language quite a lot in this, so that's just something to be aware of. I gave it 3 stars, I think 3.5. I gave it 3 stars. And then I picked up a poetry collection, Death by Sex Machine by Franny Choi. This is actually a fiction poetry collection, which means that the author is writing these poems from the perspective of these cyborg women, which is kind of like a cool premise in itself, and I found it really interesting. And they're really creative, the poems, and I annotated this one a lot. I wrote my thoughts and highlighted parts that I found really interesting, and I actually ended up enjoying this a lot. I gave it 5 stars, and I'm not the type of person that usually likes poetry, so this kind of just like hit me really hard. There are a few poems that are like written like cyborgs writing fan mail to like other famous cyborgs and like in media and stuff, and I just don't know the reference, and like I wish I did know these like famous cyborg women. It's very feminist, it's queer. There's some parts that are quite vulgar, which I enjoyed, and I enjoyed how the author kind of mixes like these great poetic sentences and structures, and all of a sudden it'll be like referencing like something digital or something like a line of like something that people just say on the internet very often, and I found it like humorous when she would like break character kind of. I enjoyed it a lot. I wrote this in my notes. The way the author uses different analogies to talk through concepts and feelings flowed so smoothly from one analogy to another, and somehow they connected. It was just like yeah, I think Franny Choi is kind of a genius, and I'm gonna read every single poetry collection she ever publishes. I know there's at least these 2 out already, so I'm very excited to get to them. By the way, I gave it 5 stars. I don't know if I said. Next up, I read this. This is OkPsyche by Anya Johanna De Niro. This book follows this kind of older trans woman who came out later in her life after having a wife, after having a son, and now she's really lonely and she's trying to find companionship, trying to rekindle her relationship with her son. No longer lives with her, but it's still kind of just a kid. It's just kind of following her as she's going to these bars, trying to date. Very casual, the plot of this, but it's mostly like explores her feelings, both looking back on her life, like realizing she was trans, how it happened, how it affected her relationship with her son, some traumatic things that happened in her past, and how she's like coping with it. So there's a lot of thoughts in this, not much plots. And in the beginning, I thought it was very trans heavy. Like, as a trans person, I love reading trans narratives. And as like a feminist person, I love reading feminist narratives. That was a reference to shit Cassandra Saw, by the way. But there's something about when it becomes like too focused on this one element where it like misses like nuances of how it interacts with like other parts of her life, or just people being more complex than that. But I kind of went back on my word because I just ended up really enjoying this. I gave it 4.5 stars. My favorite parts were definitely her relationship with her son. I found them fascinating, and those were my favorite like contemporary parts of this book. I've never read from like an older trans woman who also has a kid. Yeah, I loved reading about their relationship, even though it was a wounded relationship. I think the magical realism elements of this, like, it gets a little speculative, kind of. There are sort of these other women that she sees that are like helping her. It's almost like a hotline for trans women, and she keeps reflecting on like her own privilege as a trans woman in the midst of all her suffering, which I feel like is a very singular minority thing to do, but also interesting to read about. Like, she's aware of how privileged she is, but she's also really suffering. But I ended up just like really enjoying it. I also loved working with this book. I also highlighted and what's it called? Wrote quite a bit in this book just because there were some really beautiful passages, and I recommend it. Another thing that I want to mention is that this entire book is written in second person, so it's always saying you did this, you were doing this, you were doing this, which took me quite a while to get used to. It ended up not really affecting my experience of the book. All in all, this was a hit. After that, I picked up this tiny book, so I want you to understand how tiny this is because it's so small. But essentially, it's just like any other book. This is a fiction story, it's a horror, it's trans. You're following these two homeless trans people who, one of them is kind of the leader, and they believe that they're getting these messages from the angels that are telling them that they're going to save humanity, essentially. But they're homeless and they've just found this wreck of a house in a forest. And then we meet this other character, Lyndon, who stumbles upon these two homeless people and kind of gets intrigued and gets in love with Ash, which is sort of the main leader of these two people. So we follow like Lyndon's perspective and the other person that's not Ash's perspective. It is a culty horror, but I loved reading it from like the trans perspective, and it's queer, and you have the feeling like, could what Ash is saying be real? Like, could these angels actually exist? Or is this just gonna be like a commentary on cults type of book? I love that I never knew which way it would go. It was very page turning. It was very intriguing. It's kind of sexy. It's kind of sexy. I liked it a lot. I gave it 4.5 stars, but there is another story at the end of this called New Eden, which follows like another kind of futuristic cult scenario. And I didn't realize that this New Eden story was another kind of like short story. This was the novella, this is a short story. And so I kept thinking that the end of the first part, Corrupted Vessels, was not... Oh, I didn't say what the name of the book this is. This is Corrupted Vessels by Briar Ripley Page. And so I thought this was going to be connected to the first part, which I found really frustrating because it made me think about both the stories differently. Like, I kept thinking that the first story hadn't ended yet and that the second story would somehow connect to the first one. But when I realized, I was like, oh, they're both good, but I think I was expecting just a little bit more. I wish they would have become like a little bit more unhinged. Although, don't get me wrong, they're both pretty unhinged, okay? Yeah, trigger warning for death, other horror-y stuff like smells, I guess. Icky, but I wish it would have gone further. And then I got really sick, bad influenza, and I was in bed all day. I'm actually gonna take some coffee. Then I got really sick, and I could not watch anything, but somehow I was able to read. And I got this book for my birthday from Herdis. It is She and Her Cat by Makoto Shinkai and Naruki Nagakawa. This was not on my radar, and it's probably not the type of book like I would have picked up by myself. It is a translated fiction story, kind of written like a short story collection in the same vein that Before the Coffee Gets Cold is written like a short story collection. Like they're all connected through like the same situation scenario, but they're different stories. So in this, you're following many different stories that are following the perspective of the cats and whoever the cat is like attached to. That's why it's like she and her cat. So basically just all these women and their cats and how they happen to be with the cat, and it's about the cat's thoughts and the cat's relationship to the human and their journeys and whatever. And I don't know if reading from like perspectives of animals is my thing, because I get this feeling like a cat would never think this. A cat would know what a washing machine is. And it's like if you were to follow by those rules, I don't think we could even comprehend what a cat's narrative would even look like, you know? So that doesn't really make any sense. But it would be kind of funny where it was like, I followed this other cat. I couldn't help it. It was my instinct. I'm just a cat after all. Which like made me laugh out loud because it was just like so silly. It was well written. It's very simple story, but the fact that I read it, I was sick. It was just so perfect. It's a perfect time to read it because I didn't want anything demanding. I wanted something wholesome. I wanted something cute, easy to read. And this was just perfect. Like it ticked all of these boxes. So I just read this at the perfect time, which I'm really happy about. But I think I still gave it 3.5 stars because it is just not the type of book that I usually like, or it didn't give me that ooh, feeling in my heart. It was just wholesome and nice and well written. So like if I were to compare this to Dallergut Dream Department Store, I felt like this one did a better job of weaving in the messages in a way that didn't feel as obvious and felt more subtle. And I did really appreciate that. I loved how all these cats in this neighborhood like interacted with each other throughout the story. I liked the point where we started and the point where we ended because it felt connected and well-rounded even though these were like different stories. So if you like this concept, I highly recommend this book. We have 2 more books to talk about, both of them sci-fi. While I was still sick, I ended up picking up A Big Ship at the Edge of the Universe by Alex White. I've had this on my TBR for quite a long time, and I haven't gotten back into reading sci-fi for a while. So I was a little intimidated, but also excited because I've heard that this is a queer sci-fi book. You're mainly following this person who is a racetrack star. She's really good at car racing. Something happens that disrupts this. She ends up being accused of murdering another racer, which she didn't do. She kind of happens to interacting with this crew that used to be a crew back when a war was happening between these 2 planets. Now there's new information revealed about this huge conspiracy, and that's my way of trying to explain this book, but essentially it gives kind of like a space opera vibe and all of these different characters in the ship. There's also a magical element where different people can draw like these different glyphs, sort of, have powers. I don't really know how to talk about it, but after reading this, I was like, okay, I read that. It was fine. It was also a fairly easy read, fairly quick and entertaining. I think that the magic system could have been way better developed, like even just giving like a chart at the end of the book with like how it works, different types of magic and different people. Like I think that would have been helpful. It wouldn't have hurt the book to just have that at the end, because I'd rather have that than be like confused by the book, especially if the author like doesn't want to info dump, but like that's fine for me. So this book basically takes place only pretty much in action scenes. Like this whole book is just action. There's just action scene after action scene, and it's like very intense. And I think for being such an action driven book, the action scenes could have been a little bit better written, especially when they take place in space, which is something that we haven't experienced. So we need help experiencing this. So it needs to be like very detailed, in my opinion, when action sequences take place in space. But overall, it was like just very page turning and decently written. But actually what this book does the best, despite the fact that it's very actiony, is the character development throughout this book is astounding. Like the way the characters, where they start from and where they end up, and how it slowly progresses and how they change through everything they go through, I think is so well done. Like I usually don't comment on that in books, but I feel like this book just is undeniably strong point, character development, just really, really excellent and really, really fun to read about. This book could have been more queer. It's not that queer. I wouldn't say it's a queer book. It's written by a non-binary author, but it still uses terms like men and women and girls and boys to direct like in a group of people, which I find confusing because if I was to write something, I would just like eliminate that kind of language. There's one sapphic relationship, but that's as far as this book goes in being queer. I ended up enjoying it. I gave it 3.75. I don't know if I'm gonna continue. I'd be interested in continuing just because it was a fun ride. I love it when books manage to connect the different storylines together, like the racetrack with the past of the characters, with the war, with what was happening, like all these elements was connected, and I did really enjoy that, so I'd be very curious to read like the next 2 books in the series. But we only have one more book to talk about for this video, and it's the best book I read this month. This is The Luminous Dead by Caitlin Starling, and this is a queer horror suspense sci-fi book, and it has like the same tone throughout all of it, which is wild, and I cannot believe I was here for all of it. This follows our main character, Geyer. She really wants to become a caver. She doesn't quite have the resume for it, but she applies to this job that promises her like large amounts of money. And so the book starts off when she is in the cave and all she has is this suit that's gonna protect her, and she has like contact to one person called M above ground. And usually in this cave explorations, there will be multiple people. There'll be like a group of people that can watch her 24 hours a day and make sure she's safe and all that, but she only has contact to this one person, M. And M has not given her enough information about why she's down there, what she's looking for, and proper explanation of how dangerous it is. And Geyer learns more about this expedition, learns that there's been a large amount of people before her that's died doing this, and with the fact that she has no experience actually in this, she does her best, but she's like really nervous. I'm like, what the fuck is going on here? Who is this person that I put my trust into? Is the money worth it? And she spirals. So throughout this whole book, you're just under the caves. There's just these 2 characters, and you follow their relationship. You follow, well, the main character getting answers as to what is going on, the backstory of M. And we also learn about our main character's backstory. And it touches on topics around motherhood. Like both of these characters, M and Geyer, has complicated relationships to their mothers who are both absent in different ways. And through going on this journey with M in these caves, they both learn how to like relate to each other. They learn more about what is important to them when it comes to focusing on the past, focusing on the present, and focusing on the future. What do these factors mean for them in the relationship to their mothers, but also for themselves? Like, what future do they see? And what is the motivation behind doing the things that they do? I personally found this really, really good. I've heard some people say that it's too long, like it's like 400 pages and they're just in these caves. The ups and downs of the peril that ensues from just being stuck underground. It's very claustrophobic. The atmosphere is so well written and you really feel like you're in it and you can see it. There's also a map of the caves in the beginning, which I liked because then you could follow where she is. It's kind of like toys with the idea of like, are there ghosts? Are there other people in these caves? Is she alone or is she not? There's also these like creatures called the tunnelers that are kind of like swim through the caves, and she has to be like really cautious of them. It follows her like equipment being taken from her or her equipment failing, communications being cut. Like it's just really claustrophobic and gives you that like suspense thriller feeling throughout the whole book, and it can become a little too much and repetitive for some readers, apparently not for me. I ate it up. I loved it so much. I was so in this book, and once I started reading it, like every time I sat down to read it, like I could not stop reading it. I loved it so much. Also because these characters are so multifaceted and complex. They just have so many different sides to them, and I just found them like fascinating to follow and like great characters all around. It felt really real. They basically end up like trauma bonding, which is not great, but I just loved it a lot. I felt like nothing in this book felt particularly surprising once it unfolded, but while I was reading it, I didn't know if it was going to become more fantastical, speculative, supernatural, more sci-fi-y. Like, I didn't really know which direction it would go, but like once it unfolded, it didn't seem all that surprising. And like at the end, if I have any critique for this book personally, it's that it felt a little bit abrupt. I would have liked a little bit more time with the end, but I think that's also just because the whole book in itself feels rather slow. And so I think the ending could have afforded to also be slow. Yeah, the themes were just so good. How it wove into like the setting and the characters was just very well done. And I also enjoyed the fact that given that this is a sci-fi, the sci-fi element of the fact that we knew that our world had like expanded to being on many different planets and the backdrop of all these different corporations digging for different materials and resources. I liked it a lot because it was not the main part of the story, but it's like this knowing of a bigger world that's different from ours. I thought it was really effective and simple, just well done. All around, I really love this book and I highly recommend it. And it felt fun to get into some queer sci-fi because when I was reading sci-fi, I wasn't reading the queer shit. And it feels nice to like merge my old love for sci-fi fantasy with new things that I've learned about my life. So that is my reading wrap up for January. I know it's a long one, but I really want to give good, thorough, in-depth reviews of all these books to explain my thoughts properly. And here I have a overview of my thoughts of these two were both 5 stars. These 3 were all above 4 stars. These 3 were all above 3 stars. And then we have 3 3-star books and 1 book that's just absolutely sucked and is so much worse than everything else I read. Probably not going to be reading this much in the future. January just seems to be one of those months that is great for hibernating, reading books, starting the new year strong. So yeah, this is a long one, but it will not be this long in the future. So thank you so much for listening to me ramble on about these books. Comment down below if you read any of these books, your thoughts on them. Did you read anything great or interesting or absolutely terrible in January? Let me know in the comments, and if you've come this far into the video, comment the weird freaky sun with a smiley face. That's good. I wish you all an amazing, brilliant day, and I'll chat with you all soon. Wish you all the best for February. Mwah! Bye!